So I was in a Reddit thread the other day, and it was a year old. I was going back to follow up on a question I'd asked somebody, and there was actually a comment in there about how they wished Final Fantasy XIV had a content creator like Bellular. There's not anybody quite like Michael and his team. There just isn't. Their coverage and the fact that it's so well scripted, it's scripted like an Ethos video, but it's coverage that's as thorough as a Mr. Happy video and as common in how often they hit publish as those filthy people at Work to Game. I just, it's unreal. It's something you don't get out of a hobby. It's something that requires somebody who does it full time, and that's gotten him a mixed response out of the WoW community for people that, when he didn't like the game before, was continuing to cover it, and they said he was a shill. And people who have appreciated him for that very same thing, for saying, hey, I know you like it, and I'm going to cover it for you, even if it's not for me. And watching him in the first part of this, it made me talk a lot, and he gets my brain going. Even when I disagree with him, I think this has all been very fair. It's incredibly frustrating to see a game with the same or more resources than 14 tell me something can't be done better. And unlike the past where you go, well, maybe at that size it can't. But right now, it's Final Fantasy says, not only can it be done better, but hold my beer. Let's go break some glass ceilings. Let's go do it in a way that we didn't even know was possible. Let's go deliver something that we didn't even know you could feel. Let's go deliver something that we didn't know you could feel this evangelical about. TBC did that for me. My first time through the Burning Crusade, it shattered every expectation I could have of a game, and I didn't see how gaming could ever be better. And Wrath of the Lich King, in some ways, blew my mind again. And so those are my two favorite MMO expansions, right up until Shadowbringers. It's probably sitting in between them, with TBC sitting over Wrath, but it's hard to separate my own bias about my own personal experiences in the game and where I was at in my life. It's hard to watch something like this, where somebody that 6 months ago or a year ago, even while he was frustrated with WoW, if I'd met him in a coffee shop and we'd been able to somehow steal away an hour of our time to talk, he likely would have defended Blizzard to the point where I felt I had to jump in and defend 14 because they deserve it. And now I want to defend Blizzard here, and a lot of the things he's saying, I just can't. There just isn't a defense for the things he's bringing up. It's hard. I'm a fan of Blizzard. I am. But objective weakness is objective weakness, and it's just not healthy enough. Let's jump back in.
You start to think about why there is so little content in World of Warcraft. Wasted development time. Case in point, Covenants. They have clearly done more harm than good. Right? I mean, clearly. I think as far as the community is concerned anyway. But think about it this way. You know, between the developers making 4 abilities per class, but people only ever getting to use 1 ability. Them splitting the 9.0 story content across 4 alts in a way that I think didn't really work that well.
That got hit with job quests in 14. That same kind of, we're going to split it up over these. That on its own, it's not a bad idea, and execution is everything. So I don't think Covenants on its own can be tossed out as a concept. I think the execution was a pretty stark difference with the past, so it was always going to have some resistance. And if you're going to go that far off the beaten path, you need to prepare to be blameless. You need to prepare to be ready to be perfect, because there's already going to be doubters and haters, even if you are perfect. And so the lack of perfection just leaves a lot of room for that system to fail.
Well, you know, just because stuff worked good for Legion doesn't mean it's working good now. The same can be said for the Legendaries, or even the Conduits and the Soulbinds. I mean, there are so many Legendaries, Conduits, and Soulbinds, but players actually use very few. Was it worth making all of that? Did all of that iteration, time, and design actually translate into players making more meaningful choices? A meaningful choice may have existed on paper, but if it's not one that players actually took up, then it doesn't exist. And just because it exists on paper, well, that doesn't mean anything, actually. Is all this effort best served elsewhere? You know, perhaps on
And that's the key point. It's not just frustration with the content. It's that somewhere deep down, we know that resources are always finite. It doesn't matter how big the pile of money is, how many good employees you have. It doesn't matter how much they care. It doesn't matter how many hours a week they work. It doesn't matter. It's finite. And no matter how big that pool of resources is, there's going to be things that don't make the grade. There's going to be things that don't land. There's going to be things that get cut. And so when we see something get resources and resources and resources and resources, and it looks expensive and it's not landing, we have to ask ourselves, while it is not apples to apples and it's not literally cut this gives this, it is because of these series of choices and where these resources, there is these series of cuts that had to take place. And so covenants are an enormously deep investment. With the amount of systems we have in Shadowlands, covenants have a huge impact on the game as far as how many resources and things there are to do. And so if you don't like the way they're implemented, it can feel very frustrating. It can feel like maybe that time would have been better spent doing something else. I understand they have to make a profit. I understand that they have to look out for the long-term health of their game and what's possible technically and all of that. But when the player base across the board is frustrated with something, even though they can't pivot immediately, it is hard to see that in his recent interview, he kind of doubled down on the system. And he said, this is a system that's good and iconic to Shadowlands. Now, in that statement, he did kind of imply they wouldn't necessarily do the same thing again. Unlike the role system, which did not get nearly the level of hate in 14, because not nearly as much is locked behind it. But the role quest did fracture that stuff, and they doubled down. I think that he kind of implied, like, hey, no matter how much time is left in Shadowlands, we're not done with the Covenants. He mentioned a ripcord before the expansion launched. Whether or not there is a real ripcord, he's not pulling it.
Content. The most egregious of all of them, though, is the opportunity cost of all of this. All of that wasted time results in other aspects of the game falling short. It genuinely feels like there is a lack of higher concept thinking in the Warcraft team. That they are far too in the weeds to actually solve problems creatively. The entire Mythic Plus system itself in nature, for example, I mean, the affixes are lazy. They are broadly applied, and the whole thing just relies on numbers scaling up properly. I don't see much effort being put into it. Where is the design? Where is the love, the fun mechanics? Surely we get to have more than just doing the same dungeons again and again and again, but maybe with a seasonal affix. Where's the next level solution that improves the player experience and not just the metrics? I don't know where it is, they don't. Remember how awesome the concept of time walking was? Think about what it's been reduced to. I mean, come on. Time walking is lazily scaled, it's often broken, but it's obviously got so much potential. WoW's turning 17 years old this year, but we're still stuck playing only Shadowlands, instead of, actually having proper ways to engage with the game's whole history.
When MMOs get stale, this is a common complaint. You have an entire backlog of stuff to do, and you don't give us a reason or an easy way to engage with it, and you say, well, I just can't make anything else right now. We're like, I'm not asking you to make anything. I'm asking you to bring stuff out of the closet and dust it off and give it back to us.
And body of content. It's such a shame. Now, I've deliberately avoided doing the positives thus far, because honestly, the positives are not what we're talking about today. WoW has got an incredible history, tons of fantastic content, and for many it does remain an engaging experience in the high-end content, and perhaps for the casual dabbling as well, as evidenced, of course, by how many people actually do play it and do come back each expansion. I mean, for me, doing Sanctum of Domination and the lead-up quests, that will be a ton of fun. And you know what? Korthia is actually shaping up fine. Shadowlands with Valor, with its PvP system, with the Great Vault being better than the older Disappointment box, and other changes, it is seriously going in a much better direction. There are huge hopes, but there are also existential problems. In patch 9.1, Season 2 will feel very similar to Season 1 in every way except for Korthia and the new raid. And it just seems like this is just how it is now. It might keep the current players, but it's not going to grab new people, or keep those dissatisfied from leaving. There's no end in sight, and if there is, they should tell us how they have a plan to get there, so that we can understand WoW, have faith in it overall as a project. Now, we could go into why it's like this, between management concerns at Activision Blizzard, the brain drain going on at the company, and the age of Blizzard as an entity. But none of that is important today. All that is important is that Blizzard needs to take a step back and reevaluate.
Yeah. That a lot of those things don't hold up when you give it context outside of an MMO, outside of a single MMO. MMOs are an immense amount of time. They cost money every single month in some cases. Whether or not the game charges it through a subscription or through another method, there are many people who feel they dump $100 or $200 or $300 a year or more into these games or into their franchises as a whole, with things like merch and events and DLC and cosmetics. It can add up. And so when you factor for time and money, it is very common for people to not feel they have time for more than one MMO. It is. And so they don't necessarily get the context, which gives an unfair upper hand to the devs of that MMO that for many of their players, they may have never played another MMO or may not be up to speed on another MMO, because if they used to play it, they may have quit and not be following it anymore for a good reason. There may be a reason they left, or maybe they just don't have time to follow more than one MMO, and especially to follow a game that they're not playing. And so that gives them the ability to not worry about being fact-checked. That gives them the ability to say statements and let them float in space. But as we see people, as we see content creation become a bigger thing, you have people that are not paid directly by either company that have the ability to play both games, that have the ability to give some context to the community that finds that they align with that person's views. And those people are more than willing to call you out when what you say is crap. Those people are willing to say, that doesn't line up with what this other person who does the same job for the same kind of client with the same level of resources and time management. What you're saying is impossible is not only possible, they are dominating at it. What you are saying is hard is something that they say, yes, it's difficult, but it's worthwhile. And we've made a priority of it, and it will be available on the following date. And when that goes back and forth, it becomes a question of what is the player's priorities for which game is the better fit. When that goes back and forth where one game does one or two or three things better and the other does a couple things better and they both have some weaknesses and some strengths, it's a back and forth, it's a rivalry. And for many players who maybe don't care about items 4, 5, and 6, it becomes very clear which one they want to play for. It makes sense. But when you get to a point where one game is just not showing up to the race anymore, World of Warcraft's raids are bigger and beefier than anything 14 has put out as far as an amount of content to get through from a player that likes to challenge themselves mechanically. They can put out more raids in 2 tiers than an entire expansion of Final Fantasy. But that relies on them putting out 2 tiers. If they just don't release content, it's not hard for Final Fantasy to not only get ahead in the areas where they have strengths, in the areas where they have a long storied history of improving, but to get ahead in areas that they had no business passing World of Warcraft. Because World of Warcraft was better. They have a better pedigree at it, they have more resources, they have a more dedicated fan base, they are stronger in those categories. Final Fantasy is the underdog, and they are winning not necessarily through some major innovation, not necessarily through some amazing leap forward through space-time. They are winning because they're the ones showing up. It's incredibly frustrating to see the gap between 9.0 and 9.1 cause players who did like the expansion, who do like these systems, who found themselves liking systems they'd never done before and found depth in the game, still running out of steam. Those are home field advantage players. We're not talking about people that only play for one type of content. We're not talking about players that were mad before the expansion launched. We're not talking about players who just got started and then their friends quit. We are talking about people that are your home field advantage, hardcore fanboys. That the mere thought of playing 14 makes them wince a little. There's no reason to lose those fans. Some of them literally have World of Warcraft tattoos on their body. They are permanently marked. Some of them don't consider themselves gamers, but WoW players. And when you're losing them, what hope is there for the casual player who's just looking for something to hop into a few hours a week? It's unbelievable that they've let it get to this point. Because you just have to assume that this many resources over this much time has some sort of backup plan. That there's some level of resilience locked away in a vault that only companies that have made billions of dollars can afford. But if there is, they're not showing it to us. And so, since perception is reality on the internet these days, if you're not showing it to us, for many people who don't have time to go look for it, it doesn't exist. I don't understand how they can just sit here and as people are crying out to say, give me something and I will love it. At this point, I don't care what it is. And they say, well, it's not really what we want it to be, and so we don't have anything for you. Because what they're now expecting is because they've justified the delays by wanting it to be right, because they're doing what Cyberpunk did, and they're kicking it out to an undetermined date, and they're saying, don't worry, it'll be worth the wait, and we're going to kick it out in an amount of time that's ridiculous. It now has to be perfect. Not because 9.1 ever had to be perfect. If the initial launch of Shadowlands was not perfect and 9.1 fixed some things and not others, then we would look to 9.2. They gave that right up by delaying the patch this long. And so now they've put the pressure on themselves for 9.1 to be perfect. So now when people say, I don't like this patch and I'm going to quit, and they're like, whoa, you're going to quit over one bad patch? No, I'm going to quit over a year of bad patches because you chose for that entire year to be represented by one patch. That was your choice. You were allowed to put as many things as you wanted in that year, and you decided that I only needed to take one bite. That's your fault. And blaming things that affected the entire globe doesn't hold up, because there are other people on the globe that were affected that seem to have pivoted better.
Because while they have been trying their best, but faltering unacceptably, their competition has not been doing so. Especially Final Fantasy. So let's go. This is the only other MMO that we've got recent experience with on the team. But it's also the one that everyone's talking about right now. We'll leave the story of how Final Fantasy XIV became a talking point so quickly. We'll leave that for another day, and we'll just talk about the game. And to cut a long story short, our World of Warcraft guild has been threatened by FF, because most of them are just enjoying it way more. And this is the case for many, many out there. There's a wave happening right now. While I go through this, think about what I just said in the WoW section of this video. These games are very, very different, yes. But the stuff that I'm going to talk about here, this does apply apples to apples as far as player experience goes. Player experience is the key bit. I think the bit Blizzard forgets. Gear is simple. The vast majority of it comes via tokens that you can trade for whatever job gear that you want. You can also buy with currency. Older gear with uncapped currency and newer gear with weekly capped currency. That's justice and valor points. Yes, it still works. Crafters who are level 80 and have good gear/skill can make a form of catch-up gear to get you into the current content a little bit quicker. The only weekly lockouts that exist in FF are on the last released content, so basically anything that's not current is actually just farmable. The harder difficulty then drops usable coffers that any job can use, which is basically a bit like old tier tokens but with no restrictions. And then progression gear is rarely wasted as a result. Also, there's master loot for full premates. So basically, do content, get gear. Very simple.
I know this is scripted. I know that his team has played 14, and I know that he is at an immense advantage in pre-recorded content. It is immensely refreshing to see a World of Warcraft player who is known for playing World of Warcraft translate the game that succinctly, translate the game that quickly into Final Fantasy terms. It would take me 40 minutes to say the same thing because I talk too much. And to ask the question, why is this not better in World of Warcraft? It is not that there are not disadvantages to every single thing he just said. It is not that there are not justifications, but the fact that he didn't feel he needed to defend why World of Warcraft has moved away from or not pursued similar systems makes you wonder why they did it. The fact that somebody that is more than capable and qualified and on a channel with an audience that would understand succinct reasons why those systems are not as good, and he kept his mouth shut, is because those systems give up more than they gain. Yes, there are pros to them. Yes, there are cons to the 14 system. But when you talk about the player experience, those pros and cons are not what the majority of the player base is aligned with. And so it's incredibly frustrating when you see another game doing it the way you want. Not because you should go play that other game. Oftentimes when somebody complains, the community will say, well, why don't you just go play that game then? I live in the United States, and in the United States, we have had a rough couple years. And there are people that when we complain about another country doing something better, or about our country doing something poorly, because we are in different sides of how something should have been handled, there are people that will say, well, then why don't you live somewhere else? Because me having a criticism doesn't mean I don't love being where I'm at. Me having a criticism that I wish ours could do it as well as somebody else doesn't mean that I want to go do them their way. I don't want to go play another game to fix this one. There is a game dev, I don't remember which one, that was quoted as saying that complaints from players are not a bad thing. Complaints from players mean they care. Because if they didn't care, they'd just leave. They took time out of their day to complain because they believe you can do better. If they didn't believe you could do better, they would just quit. I don't remember exact phrasing, but that idea has stuck with me. People are complaining that the other game is doing better, not because they can just go play the other game. They will. They are leaving. But the ones who stick around and complain is because they believe Blizzard is capable of more. And they just want to see it. And I think that's a fair ask.
In FF, then, alt friendliness is the default, because you can play every job. By the way, jobs are analogous to classes. You can play every job on one character. And gear is largely shared across some roles, except for weapons. So if you are a ranged DPS, caster, healer, or tank, you can actually use the same gear on any other job in the same role. Melee is restricted due to
You say some weapons, always weapons are separate.
aesthetic differences, but simply put here, very often, the only barrier to changing up your gameplay by moving into a new spec or class, whatever, it is actually just leveling that job up and playing it. That's it. This game is so goddamn alt-friendly, it's insane. Because it's not really alt-friendliness, it's doing what you want in your character. Now, to say that these aspects of the game respect your time investment, that is putting things lightly. There's no trash in normal raids, and there's only some trash in alliance raids, which are like harder ones. At the same time, it's an MMO with tons of stuff to do, so I'm going to repurpose an Asmongold quote here. Final Fantasy is a game that makes you want to waste your time. How? Well, relic weapons that you can upgrade over an expansion via quests. They are proper grinds, but mostly gorgeous appearances. There are hunts, basically elite rare spawns for XP plus endgame rewards. There's then player and guild housing. Here's our free company's house, as an example. It's really cool. It also plays Nier music, which you can earn from the raid. Cool. There's also gathering and crafting. 11 separate full jobs in total, each with their own gear, rotations, design, all that stuff.
Careful with that. They've nerfed crafting quite a bit. I don't know that I'd say all 8 crafters have these drastically unique rotations.
Relic, tools, and quests. There are then usually a few other bits of content per expansion, like the roguelite dungeon-crawling Palace of the Dead and Heaven on High, the Bosjan Southern Front with its own progression and abilities, and the grindfest that is Eureka, also with its own progression system. There's so much to do! There's also all the character customization with appearances and dyes. The fact that you can unlock emotes and hairstyles from events and content, the gold saucer casino that's full of minigames, and so much more.
Now, a lot of the things he's naming are present in WoW. In crafting and gathering, you're going to call that a tool of the trade. It appears later in the expansion, but it's only so deep. When you talk about the Golden Saucer, they have the Dark Moon Fair, but it's only had things added to it in any way, really not that often. When you look at cosmetics, the transmog system has some advantages over the glamour system. I made a video comparing the Final Fantasy versus World of Warcraft versus Guild Wars system right here on this channel. I have talked about this stuff. They are, when you look at the feature list, it is literally like somebody read off a recipe of what an MMORPG should be. And World of Warcraft and Final Fantasy frantically took notes. They wrote them down in whatever order it made sense, and they focused on them in whatever order sounded the most fun. They ended up with different results, but because of that last 10 and 20%, the execution, the implementation, not because they started with different ingredients. Whatever system it is that Final Fantasy has, there is nothing in it that will not have pros and cons. There is nothing in it that World of Warcraft does not have some sort of parallel or answer to. Very, very, very rarely is there anything that there's not even an example of. It's just rare. But depending on the system, sometimes one game does it a little bit better, sometimes they just do it differently, and sometimes they do it a lot better. A lot better. Dark Moon Fair is only available every few weeks. It's once a month for, 7 or 10 days? Golden Saucer is all the time, and there's events going on it on timers that are popping up regularly. When you talk about transmog encourages you to go to collect everything in the game. But then raids and things like that are behind weekly lockouts, even though they're old and you're running them solo. And so it's not something that's easy to say, I'm going to sit down today and do this without an add-on like all the things to drive it for you. There are weaknesses to the way that WoW has implemented things, and that is just as true of Final Fantasy XIV. He talked about crafters and gatherers, but in order to get them into our Ishgard restoration, which was basically the Encourage event where we had the whole server contribute to a cause, we nerfed the crap out of the complexity of crafters and gatherers and added it back through a system called expert recipes. It's not the same, and in many ways I complained about it. We nerfed tanking by giving them a hard stance that just mass increases enmity. And I think in many ways it took some flavor that could have been there out of the differences in the way tanks handle mechanics and what tanks are responsible for versus a melee DPS. There are times that we complain. I think that the frustration here is that Final Fantasies doesn't feel like it's punishing you. In most cases, it's either something you ignore or it's something you enjoy. I think that World of Warcraft could be way better about that. I think that they need to get back to basics. They need to get back to why they did things fundamentally that made them a game that was impossible not to talk about.
And I've not even talked about the well over 100 hours of single-player main story quest content, which, by the way...
Which I would mention because it's required to get into the game.
People say is, especially when you get into the expansions, literally the best JRPG in the last decade.
Assuming that you getting into an MMO means you wanted the best JRPG. Doesn't matter whether or not it is the best JRPG. Let's assume by all objective measure it is the best JRPG ever made and ever will be made. It is still a requirement to get into the game. So not everybody's going to view that as a positive. Michael is an incredibly narrative-based guy, likes lore, likes story. So compared to somebody that's maybe purely mechanical, story can be quite the gate.
There is then the fact that each job has got its own quest lines. There's also how fantastic the raid storylines are. And then there's also how the community love the developers for their openness and how much fun they actually seem to have during their communications. I mean, actually, that's most of it.
Those are devs. Those are people that work on the game. There's a rock band with it feels like they happen to be getting paid for being on the other side of the launcher. It feels like really they are an extension of this community. They're in the community, they're playing, they're sharing their experience. It feels like following a guild that posts to Twitter. It feels like elitist jerks back when they used to post their clear pictures to the forums. It feels like you're with them even if they don't know who you are. Ian is sometimes known by the name Watcher. People in chat mentioned earlier when I said I didn't know what job he plays that he's playing Shaman right now and he plays in Mythic, that he's played things with the community. I think that's great. I think it is. I think the fact that when I watch game coverage through something like Wowhead, rather than something through Blizzard events, that he doesn't have the chance to tell me that is a problem. I think that the fact that the premier place to get news from Final Fantasy is from them, as long as translation is provided. The fact that every creator is smaller than them on YouTube. The fact that on Twitch, they get the biggest view totals. And not because it's locked behind something and not for just BlizzCon. This is regularly. I think there's just something special about what they do. And I think there's something special about the way they share it with us.
The community actually loves and trusts the developers. And it's no secret why. Also, almost all of the game's content is relevant to the overall experience, both in terms of story and in-game, because of the duty roulettes. Essentially, time walking baked in by default that scales well and offers currency and XP rewards. Square Enix have spent the last 10 years, since Final Fantasy XIV's literal calamity of a launch, building and improving in the game, listening to the players. So that when you log in, you have got 10 years of great game to play. Because FF does not throw the old stuff in the bin in the same way that WoW does. And you know what's really funny? The savior of this project, Yoshi P, he forced the developers to play World of Warcraft. That's what their homework was when he came
He already was a player.
in to fix the project. They were playing Cataclysm and Mists of Pandaria while they were laying the foundation for Final Fantasy XIV's Rebirth. And since, they've just been keeping the same thing in mind, the player. This is even apparent in the Beast Tribes, which are extremely similar to old WoW reps, the good ones, with groups of people who clearly advanced with your help through a widening pool of dailies in one area. Like literally like old WoW reps, the good ones. Through iteration and making changes for the sake of the player's experience, they have created, I think, the best overall MMO on the market. It really does seem to be that. Because right now, in terms of the quality of the story, the quality of the writing, a whole bunch of other things, the content cadence, they're beating Blizzard. And it makes me sad to say that. Because it shouldn't be like this. Blizzard have got the company, they've got the resources. Why is it like this? Now, I'll be honest, Final Fantasy XIV is far from perfect, and it is quite heavily weighted on its single-player storytelling, which to some people is a massive turn-off. Look, I don't think that the MDI competitors and world-first Mythic Raiders are going to go to FF14. And you know what? Good, because I actually, to be honest with you, I don't think WoW should be made around the MDI and Mythic raiding. Blizzard cares far too much about that super cutting-edge stuff that they...
Neither does WoW, according to their own statements. Ian has said that they don't want to design things for the world first race. The goal is not to race through that top-end content. They don't want to be in charge of that event, which is good for both the event and for them. That's not what they're catering around in their statements.
They've basically forgotten they have the whole rest of the game to develop. FF has not made that mistake. It has not forgotten that. Yes, FF has got its problems too. Tons of them. But the thing is that there are not problems that are deep and existential. WoW's problems are deep and existential. And I don't say this to Duncan Blizzard, I say this because I have heard too many stories of abandonment. The amount of people who have jumped ship to Final Fantasy XIV and seemingly never looked back is genuinely shocking. I want WoW to be that good, but Blizzard needs the courage to actually make hard calls. It is time for Blizzard to do what Square Enix did back in 2010, to be honest with themselves about their game and what their decisions are doing to their reputation, and to treat this like the existential company-wide emergency that it absolutely is. Because if not, they're going to be due for a wake-up call in a few years. Because not only will it be Final Fantasy XIV clawing at their heels, you'll have ESO. You'll have those other games that are there right now. But you'll also have New World, which is about to come out. And Riot will be coming for them. Riot are doing a big MMO as well. Blizzard may indeed wake up and find that not that many of their 100 million plus users give a shit anymore. If Blizzard take their competition as seriously as they ought to, we will all be happier for it. Us the players, and Blizzard as well. That is it for today's video. I know this is not a happy, cheery one. We gotta be real about what's going on. Blizzard can't keep on fucking up World of Warcraft. Simple as that. We cannot have this enduring just thing where I was always partially broken in a way. Where it's always enjoy the content you want, but with the caveat of you've got to grind up this boring thing.
It's exhausting. It's exhausting. It's exhausting to go through something you enjoy. Going through the End of Legion that I enjoyed, hopping into BFA, and then having to go find legacy content that kept me satisfied for 2 years as I waited for Shadowlands. It's exhausting to go into Shadowlands and like what's initially there and know that there's some problems with it and then have no content. It's just tiring. It just wears you out. A game is something that's recreational. A game is something that's supposed to bring joy. It's a place that even people who disagree on politics and religion and all of these big things in the world, that we can all share and have joy and have a place that we're allowed to be ourselves and focus on something that is just meant to be fun. And existential threats aren't part of that. It's really, really hard to come in and be tired trying to take care of something that is supposed to be taking care of you. It's what they signed up for, being a gaming company. And I know it's a difficult job. I know it's often an underappreciated job. We say thank you for a moment and then we forget while they go back to work. I get that. When they make a tough call in a room where they are presented with 10 options of how to move forward and none of them are without cons, and they have to pick a door knowing it's going to isolate some section of players. And we disagree not only with that being part of that set of players that's isolated, but even if we can see the other options, we wish they'd pick a different one. I know that when we lash out and we say mean things on the internet, or some vocal minority goes off and does something even more severe towards developers or content creators or whatever, that it's damaging to the community as a whole. I've vented my frustrations here on this channel. It's frustrating when one group of people has to ruin it for everybody else. And devs catch a lot of the brunt of that. But they took a job because their end product is beautiful. Their end product is an art form that gets to share some of our most joyous moments, gets to be some of our fondest memories. And Blizzard has made billions of dollars doing it. They've gotten to put their kids through college, set aside for retirement, making something that people cherish. And they know that's a rare gift. It's why they work through crunch. It's why they took this job in an industry that likely any one person's individual take was not worth what they feel they gave up in some cases. It's why devs do this. For the joy on the players' faces, for their friends telling them after playing content they know they worked on, dude, I know you couldn't tell me about it. This is freaking awesome. That's why they do this. Devs that play in communities. I played in guilds where there are people that work on these games present. I have been in places, I have been in the homes of people who have developed for these games, who took these pay cuts. I speak from an incredible point of bias because I care for people that in my mind have actual names. I've been to their wedding. I've been with them through terrible news. I've seen them struggle. I've seen them get laid off, in some cases by Blizzard. I've been through this with people that I do care for and I've shared time with. And they do all of this for the joy of getting to work on something awesome. So I think the rude awakening is something that they can do. It's gonna suck. They've let it get so far out of hand that when they reach out a hand for help and they open their doors and they finally become transparent, they're a friend that's had a hoarding problem for a long time and they ask for help and you open the door and you're shocked. And you look inside and you don't know how it got this bad. They're going to lose some people along the way. But ignoring it isn't helping. Letting it get worse isn't helping. And they've clearly proven that they can't do it without sharing that journey with the players. They've clearly proven that leaving the door closed isn't the answer. It just sucks. I name the same examples over and over about how I know devs because I don't want to talk about their names. Because I don't want to talk about the specific job they have. Because they're private people. Everybody has their story. Maybe it's people that you played with. Maybe you yourself have wanted to be a dev. Maybe it's something else you do in your life. Maybe you're really into fitness and a friend of yours is a physical trainer and you're aware of what that industry does to people. Maybe you work in medical and it's a hard industry and you are friends or family with somebody that's a nurse or a doctor. Maybe it's an industry that should be more important, such as teaching or medical, than gaming, and should be paid for that. And you see what they go through out of passion for their industry and the impact it has on people. And the industry as a whole brings value to society. And seeing people be poor stewards of that is incredibly frustrating. It's incredibly frustrating. And you may not want to talk about the specific details of one of those people. You may not want to talk about the journey they had for fear that the person you're trying to prove the point to is going to isolate them out and attack somebody in your life because you said they cared for people. I do care for devs, and I don't reveal their identities. I know that biases it, and I know it's the same tired examples over and over. I don't know what else to do. I don't know how else to make it clear when people anonymously want to hate on a group of people that I literally don't see why else they'd be doing this. Would you want to take a job that worked you long, hard hours so you could be harassed by your clientele and your boss? And don't worry, we're going to pay you less than an adjacent industry would for the same set of skills if you didn't care for what you do? I understand how you get pigeonholed into a job like that if it changes into that, but why do you stay? Why do you move from one gaming studio with crunch to another? Why do you stay in the same industry as your life suddenly doesn't have room for crunch? As you have things you want to spend time on, kids, a spouse, hobbies, side projects, games. Why would you do that? Why would you go take a job that ruins your life if you're not passionate for it? Game dev is not an easy job. It's not a glamorous job for the vast majority of people in it. It's a crap job by most viewpoints. They do it because they care. And it's incredibly frustrating for likely the decisions of a few to establish a culture where they can't pivot that company into something that gets some of the joy that should be part of the compensation. Having a BlizzCon where the whole world rejoices in what you've been quietly and secretly been working on. And now, you know what? We can't have a BlizzCon because of world events, and I get that. It can't be the same. But we're not going to let you guys work towards something that fans are excited about. We're going to continually drag your reputations and your names through the mud because it's hard to do it the other way. It's hard to pivot a company this big. So why try? The game's profitable. Who cares? It's making money. There are devs that would have trouble pivoting out. There are devs that doesn't speak to. But devs that work on the systems engineering can go do other things. Devs that work in community can go do other things. Artists can go do other things. There are plenty of people with applicable skills inside these companies that are stuck working for companies that drag their reputation through the mud because they don't want to give up on a product they're passionate about. They're stuck because they care. And people are like, well, why don't you just quit? I don't want to quit. I'm proud of what I'm working on. I'm just not proud of how they're handing it out. I'm proud of the content I touched. I'm not proud about what they did to it. They promised at BlizzCon what it was going to be. And that was what we were working on. And then they realized because there was going to be a content drought that they needed to change that content into something I'm not proud of anymore. What do? Do I leave over that? Well, no, they're letting me work on this next thing and they're saying it's going to be great. I want to stay for that. I want to be here to fix this thing. And then they abuse you again. It's incredibly frustrating to see Blizzard do this to players and to employees, to an entire industry inside and out, when they were not given, but earned one of the best reputations and loyal fan bases that there is. They earned it through doing things right. They're capable of it as a brand, and there are people there that want to work for that company. New people, old people. The old people leave. Well, the new people are there. The new people are capable of change. Change it.
Or do this chore. Or you've got this mandatory thing. It's not acceptable. It's just not acceptable. You don't need all that random bullshit. Other games do just fine without it. So that's it for me. Yeah, I'm also playing Final Fantasy XIV. Of course I am. I'm having a great time. I am playing WoW for 9.1, obviously. But right now, I can do what FF's got for me. Or in WoW, I can just go into the same treadmill again. Do boring world quests. No. No. Outside of that most top-end content, Blizzard stuff is not up to snuff. WoW is a very small game. It's basically raiding PvP and dungeons. They've let everything else wither. It's not a complete game. With the exception of PvP, Final Fantasy XIV is a complete game. Blizzard cannot continue to have an incomplete game that they iterate over. They need to make a complete game. That's that. Okay, I'm done. That's it for the video. Support Nord if you want to support us. Thank you to them for sponsoring. Link will be down below. With that said, let me know.
It's hard to watch friends that the worst thing they did was invest in a company that was doing things right. It's hard to watch content creators who the worst thing they did was invest in a community they wanted to serve. Michael's not a one-man show. He's got a team of people. You can see some of that team represented in the bottom right there. He's got support of the community of people who likely are still having fun. Maybe they're doing Mythic Plus with their friends or a family member, and that makes it worth it. He's got a job to do. And I don't envy the fact that he's now shifting to not only a game he's not interested in right now, but a game he's actively disappointed in and is stuck producing content for it. Because he can't shut his business down because he doesn't like where the game's at, when it's serving a customer base that supports him and supporting employees that want to show up and work. He can't just start a Final Fantasy XIV channel because that's not how YouTube works. He might be able to grow one, but it's going to take an investment. And so he has to value that from a business standpoint, because how awful would it be if he ended up having to go the other way and lay off whatever portion of his WoW team was tied to the least revenue, because the 14 thing cost more money than it made, and he's got to undo it. People depend on him, not because they want to work on gaming content. That's why they took the job. But they depend on him to pay their rent on the first. They depend on him to put food in their belly, to have a little bit left over, to go on vacations, to set aside for one day retiring, to pay down student loan debt. And people are quick to argue, well, then maybe content creation shouldn't exist. Well, without that, you don't get this thorough of a job. You don't get somebody with this production quality. He's an extension of gaming that is not tied to what Blizzard said. One of the disadvantages for Blizzard of not having a program like Guild Wars ArenaNet program where they partner directly with people like him is that there are no rules on what he says. He can say whatever he wants. That's what they give up by not supporting this. They give up that little bit of slack that ArenaNet has. Now, ArenaNet has had people speak out against them, but it has to build up. People are willing to give them the benefit of the doubt because they're supported to do so. And businesses have to make those decisions. If you've got 9 things going well and 1 thing not, and it gives you the ability to pay the rent on Monday, you have to make a compromise, and that sucks. He's supported by the community. He doesn't owe anybody anything, except for the people on that left side that it says special thanks to. Except for the people that show up in his streams, the people that watch his videos, whether they leave comments or not. And now, because some of them will still like WoW and won't like 14, he's put in a really hard spot. That sucks. He's not put in a hard spot because he changed. He's put in a hard spot because WoW stopped showing up. And for all the 14 people that pop up in these comment sections, it's a vocal minority, and they show up to say, good, they deserve it. They're toxic players or it's a crap game. For 1 second, imagine if the shoe was on the other foot. Imagine if 14 went on a string of bad expansions. Could be because Yoshi P left. Could be because Yoshi P changed. Our game's not just made by Yoshi P. He's done by a whole support team. What if brain drain happens even within Square Enix as they go work on other projects like Final Fantasy XVI, and the people that come out have a different vision for the game and it's not one that the player base likes and they aren't able to adjust? What happens when it's on the other foot? Have the tiniest bit of empathy for what World of Warcraft players, content creators, and devs are going through. Their big sin, their big offense was caring for a game that was fun to play. That's their big mistake. That's what they did wrong. They wanted to support and care and invest their time and money and energy and telling friends about a game that they liked. And now they're stuck paying some weird tab or punishment for that. And that can absolutely cut the other way. We see it in PlayStation versus Xbox. There's this weird thing where we're against each other. But just realize, World of Warcraft and Final Fantasy combined don't have the global impact of Minecraft or Fortnite. Don't make the revenue that even makes a dent in mobile gaming. There are entire swaths of people that are indeed within the definition of a gamer that do not care or ever have any interest in an MMORPG. They don't want to know what you're into. They don't want to hear about it. How dumb is it that you play a game thousands of hours and you pay monthly for access? You have to play with other people? Gross. You have to clear story? Gross. You have to gear up and gear expires? Gross. Whatever reason it is. I like racing games. I like shooting games. I like MOBAs. I like fighters. They don't like your game. World of Warcraft and Final Fantasy have more in common than any other game on the market with either of them. They are sister games. Twins separated at birth. They are similar. These people on this other side are your comrades. In 14 terms, you're both sundered. This is one big community. And so to dismiss them simply because their shard lives differently than you is incredibly intolerant. And yes, have they made offenses? Yes. Have they called 14 names? Sure. But to answer their ignorance, their not understanding of 14, or the fact that they're allowed to just dislike something you like and it doesn't take away your joy, doesn't mean that we need to turn around and see if we can raise up these flags of battle and charge back in to kick them. How funny would it be to go into their stream and tell them their game is trash? How awesome is it that they don't have anything to play when they get off work? How great is it that this person that said a mean thing on the internet in a video I didn't have to click on is losing their livelihood? That's so cool. This is awful. This is a slow burning fire, and maybe it won't kill Blizzard. They have weathered bad storms before. It is a huge game. Keeping 40% of their subscription base is still a huge amount of money every month. They're enormous. And I hold out hope for that. I'll put my $15 in the ring for that for as long as I can stand. But I don't think we should be cheering that their house is on fire. I think that's awful. And whether or not you believe they would be out there to care if 14 was doing it the other way, just believe in a world where some of them would. Believe in a world where some of those content creators do a good job of reaching out to new WoW players, answering questions, welcoming them into the community, helping them get over the downsides, focusing on the good, getting into content they enjoy. Think of the players that play both or bounce back and forth because they have alternating expansion cycles. Realize that the vocal minority is not a summary of it. Neither of these games is a monolith, and neither of their communities is a monolith. And care just a tiny little bit. Michael's put an enormous amount of risk putting this video out on a channel that WoW fans could backlash. And he did it because he cares. As he continued to put out lore videos on WoW, yeah, but there's still people interested in that, even if they're not subscribed. This was a hard watch. A 30-minute video that took me like 2 hours to get through. For the fact that he plays games differently than me, and he and I often disagree on what the focus should be, even though he's very well reasoned in his approach. This is a hard ask for people to not welcome him in. This is somebody that I immensely respect and I feel for. This sucks. This sucks. I don't know what else to say. I don't know.